How to become an Infosec speaker. I'm Dean Webb, a contributor and moderator at peerless.com. And with us today is Mr. Jeffrey Mann here, and he's going to tell us about his experience being a Infosec speaker. So Jeff, introduce yourself. Tell us a little about who you are and how you came to be a speaker.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying, please, let's be informal. It's Mr. Jeff Mann, which also happens to be my Twitter handle, just for convenience sake. I've been in the InfoSec business for getting closer to 40 years now. Started way back in the early 80s, working for the Department of Defense. So I've sort of grown up with this whole thing that we now call cybersecurity since before there were desktop computers, essentially.
Okay, so you definitely you can definitely tell some war stories about Token Ring and 10 base 2 and all kinds of ancient technology like that, right?
Yes, not that I would recommend that for a talk topic,
No,
although
no.
history is important.
Yeah, that's true. If anybody does want us to give a talk on Frame Relay and Token Ring, please be sure to indicate in the comments. But more to the point here. So, okay, how long have you been presenting at cyber conferences and things like that?
So I left the government in 1996 and ventured out into the commercial world primarily as a consultant. First worked for a government contractor that was spinning up a commercial practice, and then from there went on to a .com startup kind of boutique security services consulting practice. Did that for a lot of years. Fell into PCI along the way. It's the dark part of my life that I don't like to talk about. Back in 2013, I was recruited to work for Tenable Network Security. And one of the things that they asked me to do was to kind of hit the conference circuit and tell stories and do talks. So I guess officially I've been doing this since 2014, which used to be just yesterday. And now I'm like realizing, wow, I've been doing this for quite a few years now.
Yeah, funny how time flies when you're giving talks. And so, so really, your path into being a presenter was what was essentially vendor sponsored. They're looking for somebody who, what I mean, how did that happen to you? Why did they pick you and not, the guy sitting next to you?
Well, yeah, I should tell more of the story. I was recruited to work for Tenable Network Security by the CEO and founder of Tenable at the time, a gentleman named Ron Gula. Ron and I actually used to work together back in our DoD days. Full disclosure, we both worked at the National Security Agency. And Tenable at the time was owned and operated by Ron and his wife, and they were literally a mom and pop shop. And because he had known me for 20 some odd years at that point, and we'd always kept in touch. He was he'd been trying to find a way for me to come work for him for many years, and he finally landed on bringing me in as a PCI subject matter expert, because at that point I'd been a QSA for nearly 10 years. It's not the usual path for most people. I kind of knew the boss, and the boss knew me and knew that I had a lot of war stories and experience, and was sort of a seasoned veteran, if not disillusioned veteran. But he encouraged me to get out there and start speaking in public, and start going to the conferences and try to get speaking events. The first year, 2014, was mostly doing sort of vendor related events, a couple more IT conferences, were regional sales events, like a lunch and learn or a private dinner, that type of thing. I think my first official con experience was in the beginning of 2015, and if memory serves, because it has been a few years now, the first talk that I gave at a hacker conference was at B-Sides Columbus in Ohio, 2015.
So really, I guess then the first round of your talks were sort of like an extension of the vendor booth, if you
Correct.
will,
Yep.
and but so now you give more vendor neutral presentations that deal with security in general.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I first started out talking a lot about PCI since that's what I've been hired to spew about. Uh, my first talk that I gave, as I said, at B-Sides Columbus, was actually based on my first HackerCon that I went back to. Now, I had gone to hacker conferences, the few that existed, back in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
But my reintroduction into all of this community was DerbyCon. And the keynote that year was given by Ed Scotus, and the title of his keynote address was something along the lines of how to give the world's best pen test. And so I was like, oh, that's cool, because I used to do a lot of pen testing, and it's sort of a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I'll learn what's new about the industry, what's evolved and changed over the last 10 or so years since I was actively doing penetration testing type work. And I was really disappointed. And I didn't know Ed at the time. And since then, we've talked, and we've had quite a few conversations and sort of come to a meeting of the mind. But the very first talk I gave was basically a rebuttal to his
Okay.
keynote at DerbyCon, because I went in there thinking, okay, let's see how penetration testing has evolved. What's the definition of it? He never gave a definition. And then I thought, well, what's um, what are the goals? What are the objectives? If you can't tell me what it is, at least tell me what it looks like. And he didn't do that either. He basically said the best penetration test in the world is the one where you have unlimited resources, you have lots of juicy findings, and you have a chance
Wow.
to share that with the customer. And I was sitting there thinking, my idea of the best penetration test in the world is you fail. And so that sort of grew into what became my first talk. Since then, uh, I learned very early, as sort of a designated speaker for a vendor, that I didn't have to come up with a new topic every time. So somebody
Right.
gave me advice very early on, pretty much come up with a topic a year or a couple topics. So, my portfolio of talks is rather limited, even though I've been doing it for quite a few years now. So I had various topics, and one of the things that I tried to do uh, for whatever the topic was just tell a few war stories, as you alluded to
Right.
early on. And in doing that, at some point, I realized, gosh, I could just do a whole talk of war stories, especially my NSA days, because NSA has a certain reputation in the hacker community, a certain paranoia and a certain amount of conspiracy
Yeah.
theory and whatnot that goes along with it, and which largely was not my experience at NSA. So I thought, people love to hear stories. They would love to hear about what it's really like to work at NSA. So in fact, what became two of my most popular talks is uh, the first one I gave, I entitled Tales from the Cryptanalyst, because I am technically classically trained as a cryptanalyst from my early days of NSA. So I sort of made it as a spin-off of the old comic book, which then later on became an HBO special, Tales from the Crypt. So I turned it into
Right.
Tales from the Cryptanalyst. And then the sequel, more Tales from the Cryptanalyst. But those talks are completely talks about my experience in my NSA days. I was there for 10 years, from about the mid 80s to the mid 90s.
So if those are like, if you say you have sort of a standardized uh, set of presentations, are you still filling out like requests to speak at these events? And if so, does having a limited area of comment enable you to hone in those requests that you fill out?
That's a really interesting question, because I made a commitment to myself a little bit over a year ago that I would not fill out CFPs, and I've tried to wean myself off of that, and I ended up speaking at, I think, 25 different events, and I use the term loosely, events last year, and it was pretty much all by invitation. I'm really this year trying to cut back even more and being more selective. Now, part of it is, conferences that have asked me to speak last year, they want to find somebody else. They don't want me back every year necessarily. So I'm
Okay.
sort of in a deliberate downturn. But you raise a good point in terms of if you're trying to become a speaker and you're going through the CFP process, a lot of conferences are looking for something new and sexy and different. I just actually participated in a CFP committee for B-Sides Northern Virginia, B-Sides Nova. So seeing the back end of the process for the first time was very educational for me. And it's a real hard struggle to find a balance when you're on the selection side between wanting to promote new speakers and give new speakers an opportunity, which is one of the sort of stated goals of the B-Sides conferences anyway, and also trying to find good talks, decent talks, talks that look interesting in terms of the topic or the abstract that is submitted. And then in our case, we're staring straight at who submitted it, so we see who the people are. So
Right.
and it's a very delicate balancing act between, okay, that person would be great because we know him and that and we would love to have him speak, and do you just give them a free pass just because they're a known person? I can tell you that there was a lot of effort placed at we spent a lot of time trying to focus on, not, it wasn't a blind evaluation, but looking at each submission individually, and there was a rating system, so everybody got to sort of rank based on different criteria what the CFP submission itself looked like. And those scores were tabulated, and we were essentially looking at the highest ranking talks based on the scoring, the compilation of everybody that was a reviewer. And that was really first and foremost, whereas who's giving the talk was kind of secondary. So I kind of liked that about the process, because it was funny. In one of our early organizational planning meetings for the CFP committee, we were talking about who should we invite as keynotes, and somebody there, I'll not share names to protect the guilty.
Sure.
They were saying something about they're also involved in like conferences like DEF CON, and when they're looking for a keynote speaker, they're looking for a certain amount of I'm paraphrasing, sexy and new and great research, what's the latest and greatest that's going on, but they also look for people that are entertaining, captivating speakers. And he pointed to me at that point. He's like, Jeff, you're a great speaker, very entertaining, but you never talk about anything new. He's like, could you even do a talk on something new? And I responded to him, well, if I thought there was something new, I'd give a talk about it.
So really, it's sort of like the panel wants to avoid being a classic rock radio station, if you will, where they're only playing the big hits from the established artists and that's it. You've got to be able to break in the new. You've got to be able to keep things fresh and keep things going, no matter how popular some other guys may be. You've always got to work in something that's developing there.
Yep. And I would say in terms of, for people that are, trying to break into this, it's certainly helpful if you have some sort of new, interesting research, but don't be afraid to tackle something that's quote unquote new, old, or well established or well known, especially if you have a different angle on it or a different way of thinking about it. But even some of the old stuff, there's so much, and this is more of a personal observation, because I go to a lot of these conferences now. There's a lot of people thinking that everybody knows everything and everybody knows the same amount about a particular subject area topic, and that's not always the case. So
they do not. No.
So even if you think you're tackling a topic that's more or less mundane or old or not as current, I would encourage people to not necessarily turn that away, but consider it, especially if you've got maybe a different take on it or a different application, or I think what's especially beneficial if it's something that you've actually experienced in the workplace. So it's not necessarily just an academic research exercise, but it's something that you've lived, because that way you're weaving in the war stories and here's how it looks in the real world, which ultimately, for many people that are attending, that's what they want to see anyway. That because
Right.
there's a gazillion topics in this field, but what's relevant to me in my workplace? What can I take away from a talk that I listen to and go apply it back to my day job?
Right. What's going to bring my network down that maybe a vendor rep might not be completely forthcoming about, or
That's right.
some
That's right.
possible gotchas there. Well, now, and you mentioned giving 25 presentations last year. Were they all geographically nearby, or what's the travel look like for that kind of circuit?
It was mostly in the U.S.
Mhm.
and I would, coast to coast. I did a couple things at RSA, and when I say use the term loosely, like last year at RSA, I participated in peerless training. So I essentially did a workshop, which is a slightly longer presentation or talk to a small
Mhm.
group that was peerless sponsored. So I count that as a speaking engagement.
Right.
Um, uh, but from San Francisco to Texas, I did a. They like to tease me on the Security Weekly show. I was overseas twice, once to Canada, which was Nova
Mhm.
Scotia, to the Atlantic Security Conference, which is in Halifax, which I swear to God, I flew over water to get to it. And
Mhm. It's overseas then, yeah.
towards the end of the year, I was actually at a conference in Romania that was called DEF Camp. And so I'm an international speaker, legitimately overseas now that I've spoken in Romania.
So, is this? I mean, is this all job related, or do you have to get permission from your employer to be able to get off and go attend these conferences? How does that work?
Yeah, and again, I'm not a poster child for this, but because I am very senior in terms of experience, and I happen to be working for a company with people that I've worked with for 13 years off and on, the Tenable excursion notwithstanding. When I went back to work for this company, we sort of came in with an understanding that I would be doing kind of, giving back to the community, evangelism, very loose marketing, branding type of activities. So they were willing for last year at least to sort of have an experiment and basically covered most of my costs. Now that the experiment is over, I'm pretty much down to, on a case by case basis, if there's a business justification for promoting my company at a particular conference, then they'll pay for it. If I get invited to speak somewhere, which I have been invited several times for 2020 to speak, and the conference will cover my travel costs, it's a no-brainer. I've got the blessing of my company to go to it. But that's certainly a consideration. There are conferences I've learned, especially overseas, that will pay people to come speak because the bulk of the speakers, or at least the known speakers, tend to be in North America. Um, but in terms of my speaking, like I did a lot of B-sides last year. My company wouldn't automatically think that B-sides is worthwhile from sort of a marketing, sales, branding perspective, although they agree that it's a great way to get out in the community. And I happen to have 4 or 5 B-sides, which are probably a 100-mile radius of it that I can make myself available to.
Right. So, would it be fair to say you focus mostly on speaking at technical events?
It would be fair to say that I've been speaking mostly at hacker conferences or security
Okay.
conferences. And one of the goals for this year is and we're all at my company, I actually have more or less of an official part-time role in marketing with our company now. But I would much rather be speaking at industry conferences where security is something that should be talked about rather than simply limiting myself to going to hacker conferences.
So,
That.
what's the difference in audiences there? Uh, but is it like all the hackers basically they already know that security is important because they're either doing it or fighting it or both, or and then industry needs more awareness, or how do the audiences compare?
Yeah, very interesting question. And I spent probably let's say a good 10 years, if not, well, 15 years, depending on how you slice it, in the consulting side of the world, where I wasn't really hanging out with what we would call hackers or the hacker community. Because I was a consultant, I wasn't allowed to go out and play and go to conferences because I had to be a billable resource. So I really was cut off from that side of the community. And very often I would miss having deep technical conversations with people that understood just how broken things are and how sometimes easy it is for hackers to break into networks and systems and just to break things. But that doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of smart people and people that were very knowledgeable about all the aspects of what we used to call information security and now we call cybersecurity. But and then coming back to sort of the hacker community and going out into the hacker community, again, finding a lot of equally smart and enthusiastic people. What I found is very often those two communities, and this is a gross overgeneralization in terms of sort of siloing these two communities, but to a large degree, these two communities either don't know that the other exists, or if they've heard about it, they know it's something to be avoided. And one of my goals in trying to speak at different types of conferences is to try to sort of break down the barriers and let people know, no, there really are smart people on the other side too. They just have a little bit of a different focus, or the business drivers are a little bit different, but everybody's sort of working towards the same end goal, at least in theory. But so in terms of the differences in audience, while there is some carryover, a lot of times it's a very different crowd. The most visible example of that is Hacker Summer Camp in Las Vegas, where you've got the black hat crowd, and not simply the black hat going to the black hat trainings crowd, but the black hat, everything going on around the vendor exposition aspect of black hat. Contrast that with like the DEF CON crowd or even the B-Sides Vegas crowd. Very distinctly different, with very few people that I see. Chronologically, it starts at B-Sides, and you'll talk to people there. Oh, I'm heading to Black Hat. Oh, I'm never going over there. Oh, that's Black
Right.
Hat. I'm not. I'm going to avoid Black Hat to play. That's the suits. That's the managers. That's all the money people. I'll just go to the pool for a couple of days until DEF CON starts.
Yeah, I've heard the same criticisms there too. And so now, I guess to wrap up here, we've got some peerless members that are listening to this, and they picked it up because they want to see, how do I become one. What's your wizened experience advice to the young person who wants to try to, or the old person who wants to try to break into being able to speak? What are some pointers? What are some things to look for? Uh, we know we can't start at the top, but tell us what the bottom looks like and what we should be looking for in our area.
Well, so there's probably a couple reasons why people would want to get into conference speaking. I would say if your motivation is more the, gee, I want to be like them that I see up on stage, that looks really cool and that looks really fun, I would question the motive. If you are, on the other hand, you've had sort of a unique experience, or you've done some unique research, or you've just are seeing something that you don't see being talked about, or you've done something that you don't see people talking about it.
A new story, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a new story or something different, even if it's a twist on something old. That's where I would say start with that. And if you have an idea like that, turn it into a talk. I should apologize. My very, very first experience of speaking, getting back into this, and I'm saying this now because I'm thinking this is what I would encourage other people to do, is find a local meetup to sort of try out your talk, because that's what they're there for. For me, and I apologize to them ahead of time, before I went to B-Sides Columbus, I went to the local meetup, which in this area is a meetup called Unallocated Space. And they had a little open house on a Saturday and let people come in and speak. So I came in and tried out my pen test talk. My first talk was called, that response, the rebuttal to the Ed Scotus, How to Get the World's Best Pen Test Talk. And my talk was entitled, Do We Even Need Pen Testing? Do we still need pen testing? So, pick a topic, something that's you're working on, something that's of interest, something that you think is new or different, or just a different way of looking at things that you haven't seen out in the circuit. Put together a talk, give it a whirl at a local meetup. I know there's several. I don't know how many B-Sides do it besides B-Sides Las Vegas, but B-Sides Las Vegas has a track for new speakers. They're very deliberate about it.
Yes.
I've been a speaker mentor there a couple times now. Great opportunity to attach yourself to somebody that's a veteran speaker that can give you the points and tips, as well as it gives you the opportunity to speak at one of the premier B-Sides. The other thing I recommend, and I think this is linked on my Peerlist account somewhere, but one of my talks that I gave several years ago was called The Art of the Jedi Mind Trick, and the subtitle is Learning Effective Communication Skills. So I do a whole talk, and I've given it as a workshop, and I think I have it written up on Peerlist, and it's actually also I turned it into a training course on a learning company called Cybrary. CYBRARY.IT. That goes into all the details of what kind of speech, it's sort of like speech 101 from college if you had that kind of class, but what kind of communication is there? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to convince somebody, educate somebody, enlighten somebody? What are the forms and methods of doing speech? But also large or small, whether your audience is you're trying to convince your boss to do something, or whether you're standing up in front of a crowd at DEF CON, you're speaking to an audience, and what are the ways to effectively communicate to an audience, especially because so many times in our business, we're really doing what's called persuasive speech. We're trying to convince somebody to take an action, whether it's buy something or invest in training or invest in resources or to change their way of doing things. More times than not, what we're doing is persuasive speech.
Basically, like, because this happened to me, you need to be ready for this to happen to you. Here are the things you need to do. Stuff like that. Yeah.
So, there's a whole litany of things that I put into this talk/workshop /training course that goes into a lot more detail on sort of the mechanics of how your message, your talk should be presented.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thanks very much. We've been spending some time here with Mr. Jeff Mann, and I've been your moderator here, Dean Webb from Peerlist, and this will be up on Peerlist, and when it is, feel free to comment, to ask questions, and both of us will be able to respond and interact with you. This is the second in the series of How to Be an Infosec Speaker, and we have several more of these lined up for you, and we hope that you've enjoyed it, and we hope that you continue to be participating in the community, whether as a online poster at Peerlist or getting in the community and signing up to be a speaker somewhere. For Peerless, I'm Dean Webb. For Jeffrey Mann, I'll let him say goodbye on his own.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my nuggets with you. So thank you very much.
All right. Cheers. Bye.